back and forth. But folks, nothing changes about God that He created, that He brought this world into being, that He brought it into being with a purpose, with a function. We're not here by an accident. God wanted us here. God wanted this world here. God desired all these things. And one way, and we think that the devil's just working in this way, trying to destroy the faith in God that as a creator, as an existence. Folks, we need to read history a little bit. The theory of evolution was brought up at least 3 centuries before Christ. Paul dealt with it in Athens before he went to Mars Hill. The theory that there are multiple gods has existed since the world has begun nearly. The theory that something else, the theories of all these different things besides Jehovah God, the power, the one who brought the universe, the creator of all things. The devil has tried in all his ways and will continue as long as this world exists to get us to find another way. And I can assure you, he can find a crack in our armor. He can find that chink that's in the armor, the Christian armor, and that's where he's going to work. Be it about God, be it about faith, be it about Jesus, be it about whatever else it is, that's where he's going to go. He understands spiritual warfare. He understands that spiritual warfare is not just a physical persecution against the soul. He's tried that for centuries, for millennia, but to no avail. But you know what works now? You know what's worked for a long time? Finding that chink that's in the armor. Finding the person that just doesn't feel like wearing the breastplate of faith today. That some reason it's just, that helmet of salvation was rubbing on my ear. I think I'm going to take it off today. Folks, when you ever take off one piece, he's there. He is all over it and trying to destroy your faith. But he's going to destroy your faith in many ways. And I think number 2 there is something that I have seen personally a lot. Because you hear people say, if they don't say it explicitly, though sometimes they do, they certainly say it implicitly. Well, a little sin's not going to hurt. In whose eyes? Let's see, I remember reading something about that in a book called Genesis in chapter 3. That just a little bit's going to be okay. That if you do a little bit here, it's not that bad. Just this, it's almost as if to say, God's not going to know. God knows. He knows everything about us. He understands no matter where it is. The psalmist said in Psalm 137, if I go to the highest mountain, you are there. If I go to the depths of the sea, you are there. I can't hide from God no matter where I go. He created the high mountains and the depths of the sea, didn't He? You think He doesn't know what's going on in those places too? But the devil is trying to get people to reduce their faith just enough we can come in there. And I have up there, I think often of this passage in Titus chapter 2. Understanding about grace. We understand, as Paul says to Titus, that the grace of God has appeared unto all. But notice what the grace of God does. It teaches us. Teaches us that denying ungodliness and worldly lust, we should live soberly, righteously, and godly. And listen to what he says, in this present world. Now you take what Paul said by inspiration and you put that up against what people are trying to tell us. Well, who's going to know? I've heard Christian people say that, folks. Who's going to know? Do you have an answer? I did. God knows, but I know. Where's our conscience, right? Where's our heart? Is it not in the gospel? Has the devil already won before we begun? Before we could even start? Or do we understand what Paul's teaching us here? We always go on about grace, but you know what? Grace can teach. And we can learn if we listen to grace long enough. It's going to teach us to deny ungodliness and worldliness. Those things are going to appear every day. If you don't think it's appearing in your life every day, open up your eyes a little bit better, put a little Visine in, because it's there. In one form or another, it's there. He's tempting you, trying his best to get Christians to fall away. And he knows you're not going to fall off the wagon instantly. You're going to stay on there for a while. You're going to slip off a little bit, get back on, slip off, get back on. And if he can keep that, remember I said last week, doubt has always been his greatest tool. If he can produce that doubt, about God, about godly living, about anything else, if he can slip that doubt in there, folks, doubt grows. Doubt grows unless we take care of it right away with the truth of God. And that's what the devil is trying to do. I told you, he is bright. And he's trying to pull us away. Sometimes folks will say, well, church or going to worship or whatever it may be is just a choice. As long as you still love God and as long as you have those feelings and you confess and pray once in a while, it's all right. But you know what the Bible actually says? In particular, two passages here in 1 Corinthians chapter 11 speaks about when they come together as the church. You know, that wasn't just happenstance. They were walking along on a Sunday and said, hey, there's my Christian brothers and sisters. Let's go sit down once and have church today. No, that wasn't it. It was habit of the first century church, Acts 20, and verse 7 in particular, to come together on the first day of the week. My attendance in God's worship service, the worship service to God, is not a choice that I can make and say, well, I'm still okay as long as I do whatever I want to do. Where I go, I can remember years ago, I haven't seen one in a long time, but you used to on the back of semis, you would see, attend the church of your choice this Sunday. You used to see that all the time. You know, but what if my choice is not God's choice? You ever thought about that? Just because it says church out front, is it okay? It said church. But you know what? They're calling the building the church. Folks, what's the church but us? First of all, these folks aren't understanding what it is. Choice is something that God's already made in matters of doctrine. He's already made these choices that I do have to assemble. That I do have to assemble where they worship in spirit and truth, John 4:24. I have to go to those places, but the devil says, no, it's okay. Just do what you want to. And I have seen this literally in print and more times than I can count. I can worship God on the bank of the river while I'm fishing just as well as I can in the assembly. No, you can't. No, you can't. You know what I'm doing on the side of the bank when I'm fishing? You know what I'm thinking about? Trout. Catfish. Am I slipping God in between the bites on the hook? Folks, do we really think that is worship and devotion to the Creator of all that ever is and all that ever will be between bites on a hook? When folks say that, let me tell you something. The devil has them in his grasp. And even worse, they're still professing God on top of it. You ever hear somebody talk about things that, oh yeah, that you know that they live their life, they drink like a fish, they swear up and down, they do all these other things, they live ungodly lives, they don't follow Titus 2:11 and 12 at all. Then something comes up about somebody sick in the hospital, well, God's got this in control. Oh, now you know God. Now God's name comes up. But when you're living like the devil, he just doesn't have room to come in. Folks, the devil works in these ways and he pulls people of faith. That's who we're talking about here. People of faith away from faith. Because they start doubting things. They start doubting about God. They start doubting about godly living. They start doubting about the Bible itself. They start doubting about someone else around them. They start doubting everything under the sun. And if I take God out of the equation, which is what all three of these do, folks, by the way, they are removing God from the equation. Not much left, is it? Like we talked about last week, if I deny the devil and I deny God, what's left? Guess who becomes a God? That's right. Because that's all that's left, isn't it? If there's no higher being, if there's no good and evil, and I become a God unto myself, which is just as sinful as anything else can be. Now, he has a bag of tricks, or a toolbox, sometimes we say, that in this toolbox, he has four things I have mentioned here. There are a lot of others. But I think the point will be brought across well with these. In this bag of tricks, or in this toolbox that he pulls out, he can pull out things to deceive us left and right. And first one there in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, he mentions he calls him the God of this world. He says, if our minds are veiled, the New King James calls it, sometimes darkened, sometimes covered, it's variously translated. The idea is hidden where you can't see any longer. But if our minds are veiled, they are veiled, or if our gospel is veiled, it's veiled to those who are perishing. Those who are in a process of being lost. Those people, you know why they don't see? Because they don't want to see. The Bible is not some mystery that only some people understand and some people don't. I've heard people say that off and on for years. Folks, that's a misunderstanding of what the Bible actually says. If people read the Bible as much as they read about the Bible, we'd have a lot of scholars in this world, wouldn't we? Ann Landers is not the expert in Bible themes, folks. I'm sorry. She's not. Jesus is, Paul is, Matthew is. There's where we understand what's going on. There's where we have an understanding of what's going on. When their minds are, when the gospel is veiled, it's veiled to those who are perishing, those folks who don't want to believe. Because in whom he says, the God of this world, he has blinded, he has veiled, he has covered them. Those who are lost. You know why? Lest the light of the glorious gospel should shine unto them. Now listen to the end of that though. The light. We just talk about darkness. Well, let's talk about light. Notice please what the gospel does, or the gospel of the glory of Christ is translated sometimes. The gospel of the glory of Christ, it brings light. But you know what happens if I've been living in darkness for a long time and you turn on the light, you know what you do? Anybody got a guess? You fuss, you stumble, you holler, turn that light off, all those things, right? Because that's the way it looks. People that live in darkness spiritually a long time, when they finally see the light of the gospel, you know what they do? The same thing. The light has to be revealed to them slowly, right? You don't want to turn on 100 watt right in their eyeballs. But reveal that. And Satan uses that to repel people. See, you don't like that. That hurts your eyes. Come back over here where I am. And there's that veiling or that covering up of the gospel yet again. Even though it's a glorious light, even though it's from Christ, even though it's from God, he can cover it up and he can make it look like anything he wants it to look like. Speaking of that, and misconception there I have in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, speaking of the devil himself, we had read for us just a moment ago, and one thing we understand here, that we can understand from this, we understand that the devil can make himself look like an angel of light. He's not talking about a literal manifestation of some great big angelic being standing in front of you, but he can appear as, notice please the simile there, not literally, but he can appear as something. He can look like good things because he says in verse 14, even his ministers, quite literally servants, even his servants can appear as servants or ministers of righteousness. They can look like you and me. There's another scary thought for you. Should be a sobering thought. They can look like us. They can stand up, they can sit down, they can be on television, they can be wherever else it is. But if they're not teaching the doctrine of God, there's only one choice left, folks. There's no intermediate ground here. I'm teaching the doctrine of the devil. Paul spoke of in 1 Timothy chapter 4 of folks who would come along and he said, seducing spirits and doctrines of demons. Now, so don't take my word for it. Please take Paul's word for it. That's exactly what he called it. Something opposite of God's glorious light, folks. That's what they're teaching, because only the light of the gospel is going to bring me to heaven. That's it. Not my light, not your light, not anything else. Not anything else that's delivered to us, but God's light. And these folks are teaching these seducing spirits and doctrines of demons, as Paul calls it in 1 Timothy 4. Folks, that's just it. But listen how he words it though. Seducing. Tempted, drawn, pulled away, however you want to word it. That's what these things, and listen, when these ministers, supposed ministers of righteousness that are really the devil's ministers, you know what they're saying? They're not getting up and saying, let's all go worship the devil. Let's all strap on goat leggings tonight and offer a sacrifice by a big fire. That's not what they're saying at all. They may be saying God loves you. They may be saying the gospel is God's light. But for some reason it's still veiled and not given in its entirety. I've heard Well, he's passed away now. A preacher preached for 60 some odd years. Used to tell us in school, we were in classes, he'd tell us, remind us of it often, because we needed it, I'm sure. But he would remind us often, he said, fellas, listen. He said, you can lose your soul for preaching, but never preach a word of error. What he meant was, when you don't preach all of it, as Paul says, Acts 20, 26, and 27, other places. Well, you don't preach it all when you intentionally skip around parts that are touchy, sticky, whatever it may be that people don't like to hear. He says, fellas, you'll lose your soul for it because you're supposed to preach, as Paul said, the entire counsel of God. That's how the devil, one way that the devil can work through people that look like ministers of righteousness. They can avoid topics that people don't like. They cannot touch on those things that are going to make somebody mad. Or what if somebody leaves? Or what if they stay and never hear the truth? Which is worse? Right? And of all places to hear the truth, I think we're in kind of one of them, don't you? Where the truth should be ringing, roaring every time we meet. And we, as used to say, let the chips fall where they may. Because God has to speak, and He's chosen to speak through us, that we can teach one another. He can give us a misconception of understanding of things. He's that thief from Luke chapter 8, the parable of the sower, we like to call it. Well, there they are, the people by the wayside, he says, outside of the lanes of growing. Over here on the wayside, he says, here they're the ones that the devil comes and steals the word, lest they should believe. Now, how about that one? He can steal the word. Now, wait a minute. I thought the devil couldn't make us do anything. He can't make us do anything. But if I allow him, if I'm over at the wayside, where should I be? Shouldn't I start moving back on toward that fertile ground? Start turning those things around? But he can steal it away. He can take someone and he can turn someone away from the faith. But you notice also in marriage, he does the same thing. Matter of fact, Paul makes it abundantly clear that you people are supposed to stay in your marital faithfulness, the marriage bed in particular here. Stay faithful to one another. Live to one another. Stay strong with one another. Lest Satan tempt you for your unfaithfulness. Now you hear what inspiration says? That even in marriage, and that's just one area of many where he can tempt in a marriage or other places too. He can come in and he can draw people away. In a situation here, they're withdrawing from the marital bed for a while. I don't know why, it doesn't matter. For a temporary time, used to be called a season. Whatever that is, I have no idea. But until they can come back together again. They're working something out. Okay? But you keep too far along from each other, even in this situation, you know what's going to happen? He's going to come in and say, hey, that gal at work. You know what I mean? Hey, that fella that you met at the grocery store. You know what I mean? If I'm lying, I'm dying, folks. This is commonplace. Listen to broken marriages. It'd be just what I'm saying here. The devil comes in these and so many other areas and destroys what God has designed. Isn't marriage God ordained? Didn't He begin that? That's what I thought. Genesis chapter 2. It is, we call it holy matrimony for a reason. Because it is a holy state. Because that's the way God designed it. But it doesn't matter what any of these things are. He's going to keep pulling. And you know what He does when He runs out of these four and they don't work? He's got an endless, bottomless bag that He can reach in there. So I'm going to try one more this way. I'm going to try one more this way. If we ever think that we are off scot-free, that we are strong enough in our faith, that there's no way anything in this world could ever tempt me away from Christ, we need to just wake up from our dream and realize that we are human beings. That we are human, that we do see things in this world. And no matter what we think, they can draw us away if we fall away from God. It's just there's no way around it. That's the way we live. That's the way this world is, and that's certainly the way the devil works as well. Now there's some avenues of work I want to look at as we bring this to a close for just a moment here. 3 in particular that the devil uses. In Revelation chapter 2, in particular, the church there, he says, I know your works. I understand things, in other words, that's going on. But he also says that Satan dwells there and has a throne there in the church. In other words, he wasn't literally propped up on a throne on the dais up here. Wasn't literally up there. But does he have to be to overtake a congregation, a person, a town, a country? He's way smarter than that, isn't he? But what he does is he rules, and that's exactly what was going in here. He had a throne, it says there. What's a throne represent? Kingship, power, rule, authority, right? Guess who was ruling this church? But the devil. There's a reason why it goes on to say that Antipas, my faithful martyr, was killed among you. They probably didn't care about Antipas anymore if the devil's ruling the church, did they? But hallelujah, there was at least one faithful guy there. Makes me feel a little bit better, right? No matter where you are, there's still someone that's usually faithful to God in the midst, no matter what's going on. Yet here he is, he had been enthroned in this place, and he can still be enthroned, and not only in a congregation, but in individuals' lives. And when he's there, when he's enthroned, as the picture gives him here, he is ruling. Remember, Paul said in 2 Corinthians 4 that he is the God of this world. Power, rest was in the devil himself. 1 John 2:16 doesn't mention the devil himself, but it certainly mentions three avenues here within this passage that he refers to our fleshly appetites. And if you go back throughout all the biblical history and you start seeing how people are tempted, how they're drawn away, how the devil tempted Jesus, all three avenues: lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride or the vainglory of life. He's going to appeal to one's pride. That's where he's going to go. He's going to try to hit us. Remember what I said a moment ago. If he doesn't succeed in one area, it doesn't seem to bother him at all. He just turns around. They say about quarterbacks in football games that they have to have a short memory. Well, he's got one too. And he's going to keep coming back and keep coming back and keep coming back until he can succeed. But he's going to get us in one of these three areas, no matter what it is. From Eve until however long the world lasts, that's his modus operandi, if you will. That's how he conducts things, because he understands things about us. And finally, think about this. I think this is one we don't think about very often. We think about the biggies, right? Sexual immorality and alcohol and wantonness and all the other things that exist in this world. Those biggies, as we like to say. But you know what he can also do? In anger. Paul said we should be angry and sin not. Notice, please, we can be angry without sinning. Did you hear what he said? Be angry and sin not. Do not sin. He says, don't let the sun go down upon your wrath. Neither, he says, give place to the devil. When I keep that anger and it turns to wrath, two different words, English and Greek, by the way. When anger turns to wrath, when it turns to resentment, when it turns to so many different things it can grow into, and it can grow fast, folks. When it does that, we have given place to the devil, because that's just what he wants. If they stay mad, especially at a brother or sister in Christ, they stay mad at somebody that sits across the way over here, well, I got them. Because that's going to spread a little bit more. And a little more doubt, remember, is going to come in. And this person over here is going to tell this person how bad this one is over here. Surely that wouldn't happen, though. Surely nobody would gossip or tell something, no. But they do. And the next thing you know, within the Lord's people, there's a division. And it goes right back to Ephesians 4:26 and 27. Someone gave place to the devil. You know what giving place means? It means leaving that chink in that armor open and we can come in there. You ever seen a mouse slip through a crack? And I mean a crack. You think there's no way that little nasty booger can get through that crack. And next thing you know, you jump at them, they turn, and in about half a second, they're gone. You see the tail going through. It's amazing. But you know what sin can do by way of the devil? It can find a crack even smaller than that. Neither give place to the devil. Don't give him a crack to fall into. Don't give him a way to get in. Don't give him an opening to get inside of, because once he gets inside in there, I can assure you the Bible teaches that doubt is there. Those people down at church don't really like you. That fellow over there, this woman over here, this person over here, this thing over here, they're not worshiping right. You ought to go over here where you're more happy. You ought to do this. You ought to go where there's great bands and entertainment. You ought to And it's just on and on and on and on we go. And faith gets destroyed right back where we started. Faith is destroyed because somebody, we or somebody else, has given place to the devil. And folks, if you've ever seen a congregation be torn apart from the inside, it's one of the saddest things in the world. When God's people can't resolve issues. When they've given place to the devil, when they've let him come inside. I told you last week, and I think you already knew it before I told you, he doesn't care about people in the world that are lost. He's got them. That's like me worrying about getting a loaf of bread when we've got 2 in the cabinet. There's no need to worry about those things. We need something else in the cabinet, not bread. And he's going to work at us. He's going to pull. He's going to make sense sometimes. Can you believe it? Sometimes people are going to say, hey, that doesn't sound too bad. I think that makes a little sense. It really doesn't. But to a weary, sometimes unfaithful, sometimes not, whatever it is, mind, he'll penetrate. He'll find our chink in our armor. He'll find that crack in the wall. And before you know it, that crack in the wall is a huge door where any and everything of the world can come in. That's how strong he is. That's how powerful he is. And folks, that's our enemy. That is the enemy of God's people and always has been. There might be men that have come along that have looked like God, the enemies of the church, and maybe they are to a certain extent, but I can assure you who's behind them is who's really our enemy. And watch for the ministers of righteousness, or who appear as ministers of righteousness, but are really not. Watch for the things that happen. Watch our own armor. Watch our own faith, and we strengthen it. Because, I mentioned last week and I'll mention again in Ephesians chapter 6, Paul says to be wary of the wiles of the devil. That's that sneaky. That's that wily coyote. Literally, the word wiles is morphed into that word. One who was wily, tricky, deceiving, all of those things. Folks, don't let it happen to us. Now, what we can do today, if we're not a child of God, is to become one. Is to become and listen to God, to obey God, not listen to what the devil says over here, not listen to how scriptures are twisted, not listen to anything else, but simply listen to what God has to say. And read down through, and we understand that we must obey the gospel of Jesus Christ, folks, because it puts us into Jesus Christ. It makes us a child of God. It separates us from the world. It makes us holy people, the Bible says. We are all these things because God said so and because we did what God said. And folks, if we have done those things but fallen, when you fall, let's go back to Luke 8 just for a moment. We often talk about the wayside. And you talk about wide open for the devil. He'll get us. He'll get us every time. If anyone has need today, why don't you come while we stand and while we sing?